It's September 12th, 1683, and on the hills above Vienna, the most dramatic cavalry charge in European history is about to begin. King Jan III Sobieski of Poland sits atop his warhorse, surveying the massive Ottoman army spread out below him, like a dark sea threatening to swallow the last major Christian city, standing between the Islamic world and the heart of Europe. Behind him, 3,000 Polish Winged Hussars, the most feared heavy cavalry in the world, prepare for a charge that will either save Christian Europe or witness its final destruction. This isn't just another battle between rival kingdoms. This is the climactic moment of a civilizational struggle that has been raging for over 2 centuries, pitting the rapidly expanding Ottoman Empire against the fragmented Christian powers of Europe. And standing at the center of this epic confrontation is one man whose decision in the next few minutes will determine whether Europe falls under Islamic rule or survives to shape the modern world. But to understand how Poland's king crushed the Ottomans and saved Europe, you need to picture the world of 1683, a world where the Ottoman Empire was at the absolute peak of its power and seemed destined to conquer all of Christian Europe. The Ottoman Empire in 1683 wasn't some declining power struggling against European expansion. This was the most formidable military machine on earth, controlling territory from Algeria to the Persian Gulf, from the Crimea to the gates of Vienna itself. For over 200 years, Ottoman armies had been advancing steadily into Europe, conquering the Byzantine Empire, overrunning the Balkans, and repeatedly defeating the combined armies of Christian princes who tried to stop them. By the late 17th century, Ottoman power seemed unstoppable. They controlled Hungary, most of modern-day Romania, and were pressing deep into Austrian territory. Their Janissary Corps, elite infantry troops trained from childhood to be fanatically loyal to the Sultan, were considered the finest soldiers in the world. Their artillery was superior to anything European armies could field. Most terrifying of all, they commanded seemingly unlimited manpower from across their vast empire. The man leading this Ottoman juggernaut was Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, one of the most ambitious and ruthless commanders in Ottoman history. Kara Mustafa had convinced Sultan Mehmed IV that the time had come for the final conquest of Christian Europe, starting with Vienna, the gateway to Germany, Italy, and the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. Vienna in 1683 was more than just the capital of Austria. It was the symbolic heart of Christian resistance to Islamic expansion. If Vienna fell, nothing would prevent Ottoman armies from marching to Rome, Paris, or even London. The psychological impact of losing Vienna would be devastating, probably triggering the collapse of Christian resistance across Europe. The siege began on July 14, 1683, when a massive Ottoman army estimated at between 250,000 and 300,000 men appeared before the walls of Vienna. Think about those numbers for a second. This was probably the largest army assembled in European history up to that point, larger than the forces Napoleon would command over a century later. The Ottomans didn't just bring soldiers, they brought an entire civilization with them. Their camp outside Vienna was like a mobile city, complete with markets, mosques, hospitals, and workshops. Engineers began digging elaborate tunnels under Vienna's walls, while artillery bombarded the city day and night. Kara Mustafa was so confident of victory that he had already begun dividing up the spoils of conquest among his commanders. Inside Vienna, the situation was desperate beyond imagination. The city was defended by only about 15,000 soldiers and an equal number of civilians under the command of Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg. They were facing an enemy that outnumbered them 20-1, with no prospect of relief from the outside. The defenders knew exactly what would happen if the city fell. Ottoman armies didn't just conquer cities, they systematically enslaved the population, carrying off tens of thousands of Christians to be sold in the slave markets of Constantinople and Cairo. The men would be killed or enslaved, the women would disappear into Ottoman harems, and the children would be taken to be raised as Muslims and trained as Janissaries to fight against their own people. Week after week, Ottoman engineers dug their tunnels closer to Vienna's walls, while artillery bombardments reduced parts of the city to rubble. By early September, massive mines had been detonated under the walls, creating breaches that Ottoman assault troops tried repeatedly to exploit. The defenders were exhausted, running low on ammunition, and facing the prospect of imminent massacre. But 300 miles to the north, salvation was marching toward Vienna in the form of the most remarkable relief army in European history. King Jan Sobieski of Poland had received desperate pleas for help from Emperor Leopold I of Austria, and had made a decision that would change the course of world history. He would march to Vienna's rescue with every soldier he could muster. Jan Sobieski wasn't just any European king. At 54 years old, he was already a legendary military commander who had spent his entire adult life fighting Ottoman expansion. He had defeated Turkish armies at Chosim, Law, and a dozen other battles across Eastern Europe. More importantly, he commanded the loyalty of the Polish Winged Hussars heavy cavalry, whose reputation for invincibility had spread across Europe and into the Ottoman Empire itself. The Winged Hussars weren't just another cavalry unit, they were a military innovation that combined the shock power of heavy cavalry with psychological warfare on an unprecedented scale. These warriors rode massive war horses and wore distinctive wings attached to their backs that created a terrifying sound when they charged. More importantly, they had never been defeated in battle, and their very appearance on a battlefield could cause enemy formations to break and run. Sobieski's march to Vienna was a masterpiece of speed and secrecy. He moved his army, about 23,000 Poles plus additional German and Austrian forces, over 300 miles in less than a month, coordinating with other Christian commanders to assemble the largest relief force that could be gathered. By early September, approximately 60,000 Christian soldiers were approaching Vienna from the north. But Sobieski faced a nearly impossible tactical situation. The Ottoman army was enormous, well entrenched, and had been preparing for months to fight off any relief attempt. The approaches to Vienna were heavily fortified, and Kara Mustafa had positioned his best troops to intercept any Christian attack. Sobieski's solution was characteristically bold and brilliant. Instead of attacking the Ottoman positions head-on, he would use the terrain around Vienna to his advantage. The Vienna woods and Kahlenberg Mountain provided cover for his approach, allowing him to concentrate his forces for a single, devastating assault that would catch the Ottomans off guard. On the night of September 11th, 1683, Sobieski secretly moved his forces through the Vienna woods and up Kahlenberg Mountain. The Ottomans knew a relief army was approaching, but they had no idea where or when the attack would come. As dawn broke on September 12th, Christian forces were in position for what would become the largest cavalry charge in history. The battle began at dawn with artillery exchanges and infantry attacks designed to pin down Ottoman forces and prevent them from repositioning. But Sobieski was waiting for the perfect moment to unleash his secret weapon, the combined charge of all his cavalry forces, led by the 3,000 Winged Hussars who had never known defeat. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the hills, Sobieski gave the signal for the charge that would decide the fate of Europe. What happened next was unlike anything seen before or since in the history of warfare. 18,000 cavalry, Polish Winged Hussars, German cuirassiers, Austrian dragoons came thundering down from Kahlenberg Mountain in the largest cavalry charge in recorded history. The ground shook under the hooves of thousands of war horses, the air filled with the terrifying sound of the hussars' wings, and their battle cry of Jesus and Mary echoing across the battlefield. Leading this incredible charge was King Jan Sobieski himself, sword in hand, riding at the front of his Winged Hussars like some legendary hero from an ancient epic. This wasn't a king who commanded from the rear. This was a warrior monarch, leading his men into the most important battle of their lives. The psychological impact on the Ottoman forces was devastating. Soldiers who had never retreated from battle took one look at that avalanche of cavalry thundering toward them and broke ranks. The sight of the Winged Hussars, those legendary warriors they had heard about in whispered stories charging directly at them, was more than human nerves could endure. The Ottoman battle lines, which had held firm against months of siege warfare, collapsed in minutes under the impact of Sobieski's charge. Entire regiments threw down their weapons and fled. Artillery positions that had bombarded Vienna for weeks were overrun and captured. The disciplined Ottoman army that had seemed invincible just hours earlier disintegrated into a panicked mob. Kara Mustafa, watching his magnificent army destroyed in less than an hour, ordered a general retreat. The largest force the Ottoman Empire had ever assembled was broken and fleeing, leaving behind their artillery, their treasure, their supplies, and thousands of prisoners. The siege of Vienna was over, and Christian Europe was saved. The victory was so complete and so sudden that it seemed almost miraculous. An army that had been on the verge of conquering Vienna and opening the road to the rest of Europe had been utterly routed by a charge that lasted less than 30 minutes. Ottoman casualties were enormous. Estimates suggest they lost over 10,000 dead and wounded, plus thousands more captured. But the real significance of the battle went far beyond the immediate military results. The Battle of Vienna on September 12, 1683, marked the turning point in the long struggle between Christian Europe and the Islamic world. Never again would Ottoman armies penetrate so deeply into European territory. Never again would they pose an existential threat to Christian civilization. The news of Sobieski's victory spread across Europe like wildfire, triggering celebrations from London to Rome. Pope Innocent XI hailed Sobieski as the savior of Vienna and Western Christendom. The Holy Roman Emperor Leopold personally thanked the Polish king for preserving his empire. Across Europe, church bells rang out in thanksgiving for deliverance from what had seemed like certain conquest. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat at Vienna was a catastrophe from which it never fully recovered. Kara Mustafa was strangled on the Sultan's orders for his failure. The aura of Ottoman invincibility was shattered forever. Within a few years, Ottoman forces were retreating from Hungary, and the empire entered the long decline that would eventually lead to its complete collapse after World War I. But Sobieski's victory had consequences that extended far beyond military and political considerations. By saving Vienna and breaking Ottoman power, he preserved the conditions that would allow European civilization to flourish during the Enlightenment. The scientific revolution, the development of democratic institutions, the economic growth that would fuel European expansion around the world, all of this was made possible by Sobieski's charge at Vienna. Think about what the world might have looked like if Vienna had fallen. If Ottoman armies had continued their advance into Germany and Italy, European development would have taken a completely different path. The intellectual and cultural achievements that emerged from Christian Europe in the following centuries might never have occurred. Sobieski's personal role in this world historical moment cannot be overstated. This wasn't just a victory achieved by superior numbers or better technology. This was leadership and courage at the most crucial moment in European history. When the fate of an entire civilization hung in the balance, one man made the decision to risk everything in a desperate charge that changed the course of world history. The Polish king's victory also demonstrated something important about the nature of historical change. Sometimes the fate of civilizations can turn on a single moment, a single decision, a single act of extraordinary courage. If Sobieski had hesitated, if he had decided the odds were too great, if he had chosen safety over glory, the entire future of Europe might have been different. After the battle, Sobieski famously wrote to his wife, "We came, we saw, God conquered," a reference to Julius Caesar's famous phrase, but with a crucial difference that acknowledged the divine providence he believed had guided his victory. For Sobieski and his contemporaries, this wasn't just a military triumph, but a miraculous deliverance of Christian Europe from Islamic conquest. The Battle of Vienna also marked the emergence of Poland as a major European power at the height of its influence. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1683 was one of the largest countries in Europe, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Sobieski's victory demonstrated that Poland could field armies capable of defeating the greatest powers of the age. But perhaps most remarkably, Sobieski's triumph was achieved through an alliance of Christian powers that had previously spent most of their time fighting each other. Poles, Germans, Austrians, and other nationalities fought together under Sobieski's command in a rare moment of European unity against a common threat. The cooperation between Poland and Austria at Vienna was particularly significant, given the long history of conflict between these two powers. By putting aside their differences and working together against the Ottoman threat, they demonstrated that European states could overcome their divisions when faced with an existential challenge. The tactical innovations displayed at Vienna also influenced European military development for generations to come. The coordinated use of cavalry, infantry, and artillery that Sobieski employed became the standard for European armies. The psychological impact of the Winged Hussars inspired cavalry units across Europe to develop their own distinctive traditions and practices. Jan Sobieski returned to Poland as a hero whose reputation stretched across the known world. The defeated Ottomans named him the Lion of Lechistan, acknowledging his prowess even in defeat. European monarchs competed to honor the king who had saved their civilization from conquest, but Sobieski's later years were marked by the typical problems that faced Polish monarchs in the 17th century. The Polish political system, with its emphasis on noble privileges and weak royal authority, made it difficult for even successful kings to implement lasting reforms. Despite his military genius and international prestige, Sobieski struggled with domestic political challenges that would eventually contribute to Poland's decline. When Sobieski died in 1696, Europe lost one of its greatest military commanders, and Poland lost its last truly great king. His death marked the beginning of the end for Polish power, as the Commonwealth entered a period of decline that would culminate in its complete partition by Russia, Prussia, and Austria in the late 18th century. The irony of Sobieski's legacy is profound and tragic. The king who saved Europe from Ottoman conquest lived to see his own country beginning the slide toward destruction. The same political weaknesses that made it difficult for Sobieski to govern effectively would eventually make Poland incapable of defending itself against its neighbors. But the broader significance of Sobieski's victory at Vienna transcends the later fate of Poland itself. By crushing the Ottoman army and ending the threat of Islamic conquest, he preserved the conditions that allowed European civilization to develop along the lines we recognize today. The Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the development of democratic institutions, all were made possible by Sobieski's charge at Vienna. Looking back at September 12, 1683, it's clear that this date ranks among the most important in world history. The Battle of Vienna was one of those rare moments when the action of a single individual in a few crucial minutes changed the entire course of civilization. King Jan Sobieski and his Winged Hussars didn't just win a battle, they saved a civilization and shaped the modern world. Their thunderous charge down Kahlenberg Mountain echoes through history as one of the most decisive moments in the long struggle between different visions of how human society should be organized. The story of how Poland's king crushed the Ottomans and saved Europe reminds us that history is not inevitable, that the world we inhabit today is the product of countless individual decisions made by real people facing impossible odds. Sometimes, as Sobieski proved at Vienna, extraordinary courage and decisive leadership can indeed change everything.